Hi there, I'm Ken, and I'm sitting in my chair thinking. I often sit in my chair thinking. I mean, what else is there to do? I can't go out. Well, last week I was sitting in my chair, as usual, thinking, and I was thinking about a book I bought from the charity shop before they closed down. This book was called Candide, and it was written by a man called Voltaire. Now, I'd been told that Voltaire was a great writer, so I thought I'll read this book. Anyway, I did start to read it, but personally I couldn't get into it. It was a bit philosophical for me. Maybe I'm not educated enough or something, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, I didn't really get into it, but it made me start thinking again about what authors I do like. And there's one particular author who I am very fond of, whose books have sold all over the world, have been made into films and franchising things, and I consider this writer to be one of, if not the best writer. And no, I'm not talking about J.K. Rowling. No, I mean, she's good. She's a good writer. She's made lots of books, lots of films, and of course, lots of money. No, my writer is a different style of writing. Now, I'm going to, because I like this writer, I made a little booklet for my granddaughter Ruby for her to read. It's not very big, it's only a short booklet, about 7 pages. I found that children prefer short books. In fact, Ruby told me herself she'd been reading The Philosopher's Stone, which is a good book, and she really enjoys reading it. But she said she would have preferred it to be in a few smaller volumes. The same story, but in maybe 4 or 5 books. She said to me, I wouldn't mind paying more for that. But of course she wouldn't be paying it, would she? Her dad would be paying it. Anyway, let's get back to this story I've written. I'm going to show you it now. And look at the first page, the first paragraph I've written. It's not an exact copy from the book, but you'll get some idea, and I hope you'll be able to see from this who my favourite author is. Oh, here we go. I've called this book Great Writers.
Great Writers. The room is very dark. A shadowy figure moves slowly across the floor, with chains dangling from his body, clanking ominously. He speaks with a wailing voice. I am the ghost of Christmas past. Anyone reading this will almost certainly know that it came from a story written nearly 180 years ago, entitled A Christmas Carol. Most people will say it comes from Scrooge, although Scrooge is just a character in the book. They will also know that it was penned by one of the world's greatest authors, Charles Dickens. I can hear some of you arguing this, saying you think J.K. Rowling is better. So let's compare them. Rowling has certainly made more money than Dickens ever made. But they are very different writers. They both write fiction, but Rowling's is all fantasy, where Dickens is based on facts. Rowling's Harry Potter is just one story with different episodes. Dickens wrote many stories based on the people and conditions of the 1800s. With his book, you can see how the wealthy lived in bright, large houses in an affluent area, and the poor lived in squalid tenements with raw sewage in the streets infested with rats. You can see this in Oliver Twist. His books show the difference in people. Some are cruel and nasty, like the Murdstones in David Copperfield. Others are kind and considerate, like the Chillerby brothers in Nicholas Nickleby. Harry Potter books are good fun, but they do not affect your emotions as Dickens stories do. His books can often make you cry. They're not all sad though. He wrote comedies too, like the Pickwick Papers. The ability to affect the emotions of the reader makes a great writer. Rowling is a good writer, but Dickens is a great writer. There are many Dickens books which are easy to read for children. Osborne Dickens Collection is a set of 5 easy-to-read stories: Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Great Expectations, Bleak House, Little Dorrit, and A Tale of Two Cities. There's also the complete Dickens, again Osborne. This has all the stories written in an easy-to-read format. So, what of the man? Charles Dickens was born on February the 7th, 1812. At first, he had a nice life. He was one of 8 children, and they lived in a pleasant house near to the sea. Then his father had to move to London, and he got into debt and had to go to a debtor's prison. Dickens put something like this in Little Dorrit. When he was 12, he had to work in a factory sticking labels on bottles of shoe polish. He showed this in David Copperfield to give some example, an idea of what life was really like for poor people. He was probably thinking of his father with his character Mr. Micawber. When he was 15, he went to work in a solicitor's office. The shady practices he witnessed there are often shown in his novels. He was determined to better himself. He even taught himself shorthand. He started to write short stories, and his first story was published in a magazine when he was 21. His story, The Pickwick Papers, was published as a series of monthly episodes, the first in March 1836. It was so popular that people could hardly wait for the next episode, a bit like Coronation Street today. His next novel was his most famous, Oliver Twist. Dickens' marriage was unsuccessful, and he fell in love with an actress. His character, Estella, in Great Expectations, was modelled on her. He left his wife, and the scandal affected his life. As his health deteriorated, he continued to write and travel around the country. He died in the middle of writing his 15th novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, when he was 58. Dickens was passionate about the poor and neglected, and wrote many of his stories about them. In Nicholas Nickleby, he portrayed a school in Yorkshire with abandoned children and a brutal headmaster. His passion was not confined to write about these conditions. He was an ardent campaigner trying to change them. So, you can see that Charles Dickens wrote stories mainly to reflect the lives of people at that time. These books have been read for the last 180 years and continue to be read for many years to come. William Shakespeare introduced many new words and phrases into the English language, and so did Charles Dickens, including slow coach, butterfingers, round the clock, the creeps, on the rampage, and many more. Charles Dickens died on June the 9th, 1870. Now, as I've said, in my opinion, he is the greatest writer of all time. You may not agree. In fact, we shouldn't really agree who's the greatest writer. If we all thought the same thing, we would all be reading The Little Red Book by Monte's son. So, you make your own opinion up. You might like J.K. Rowling's because it's adventure, excitement, but I like Charles Dickens. In fact, his book is the third best-selling book of all time. And it's not Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist is very popular, but the most famous, most selling book of all time is A Tale of Two Cities. The opening phrase of that book is a bit like today. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. His book reflected the differences between the classes. Today's phrase, it's the best of times, it was the worst of times, shows how we are now. The worst of times is this pandemic, COVID, which is all around the world killing people. The best of times is we now have a vaccine, and there is light on the horizon. We will soon be over this pandemic, and our life will be back to some sort of normality. Now, I have put at the back of this book some books, in fact, all the books I've found written by Charles Dickens. The Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist. I read most of them, not all of them, most of them. Well, quite a few. I think my favourite book is probably David Copperfield. But everyone's got their own choice. And the last one, of course, The Mystery of Adrian Drood, was unfinished. So there we are. That's just a very short booklet on Charles Dickens, my favourite author. Maybe not yours, but definitely mine. There are other booklets I've written on YouTube. I wrote one about William Shakespeare. I think I've written a couple more as well. But they're on my YouTube site, which you're looking at now, Kenneth Mallison. Well, I hope you found that interesting. It's not a long book, so it might be better for kids to read. Thank you.